Live. Good morning, folks. So we are live, hopefully, this morning on Facebook in the Business Growth Community, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube. So we're multitasking this morning, which never really tends to go well, but it's fine. I'm sure it'll all be fine. This morning, my lovely guest is Dave Bradburn, and we are going to be talking all things graphic design and branding. So I have known Dave now for too many years to mention, I think.
Yeah.
But Dave has done all my branding since I went independent. So I was originally with a franchise, but since I was, well, actually, I think you did some stuff for me.
There was a few leaflets and things before that, weren't there?
But since then, you do all my branding, all my kind of logo, social media design, brochures, all sorts of stuff like that. So we're going to have a juicy conversation all about branding today. So Dave, first off, just tell us a little bit about you and how you got into graphic design and why you love it so much.
Morning, everyone. My background is that it's a very linear path, actually. I went to university and did a degree in graphic design, typography and design, really. So graphic design stuff generally. And then came back up this direction, worked for several design agencies around the Northwest, and then set up on my own about 15 years ago now, actually, a little over 15 years. So, yeah, I've been a lot of more years than I care to add up there, I think, really.
That's the theme for this morning, isn't it?
I think it is.
There are more years than we all care to mention. So I think we need to start off with the super straightforward and blatantly obvious question, and yet perhaps not a blatantly obvious answer. But what is branding? What are we talking about when we talk branding?
Yeah, well, it does get quite confused as a term, really. Branding as a whole goes far beyond just visual elements, for one thing. It is really the brand of a business is how it is perceived by people. So it really is slightly intangible. It exists in the mind of the people that are coming in contact with it. So that perception that you build of it, and if you imagine, one of the big companies, Apple, or you could do one of the supermarket chains or something like that. As soon as we say the name of it, you'll have some thoughts on what you feel that company stands for. And that's built up by whatever experience you've directly had with them, whether it's working, buying from them, working with them, whatever the context may be, whether it is, you've actually been in and met the people from that company directly, whether you've spoken to them over the phone, whether you've exchanged emails, whether you've been on the website, whether you've just been told things about it by other people as well, and things like that. So all of that, every touch point is termed, goes together to sort of build that perception. And really, that the perception is the brand. So branding is steering those perceptions, really, and trying to sort of influence what people feel about it, really. So, and obviously you're trying to influence it positively, but you're steering people towards getting a greater understanding of what that company does, what it stands for, what its values are, and all those things, really.
So just a quickie, there's a couple of people that have said hello on the Facebook stream, but I can't tell who they are. I can if I open a different window. But I've just popped a little link into the Facebook Live, which will allow Be Live streaming software to actually show us who you are. So I can see Kelly. I think the other two are actually Eric and Sarah, but I can't see who you are on here. So if you could just click that link, that will actually let Facebook tell us who you are, and we can talk to you properly. So Dave, we talked there about branding being about that entire perception of your business and getting across the values and everything that you're all about. So how important in all of that is the design?
Well, it'll play a big part of it. I mean, if you're interacting with customers and things, and that's part of it, obviously that's a huge part too. But for many people, the first contact that they have with a business will actually be online. Visually, it'll be maybe online or increasingly online. They may somehow come across some of your literature or see some of your social media graphics or whatever it may be, really. So the visual side, the design side, is a big part of it, and it is a big part of the opportunity to steer the perceptions as well, really, and to set those. So yeah, It's not just the logo as well. Sometimes the term, rebranding or something is actually meaning I'm getting a new logo, and actually really it goes far beyond that. It's into all the color palette that you use, the typography that you use, and all kinds of other elements. Really, everything that comes together visually that is part of it, really.
Okay, so let's try and get into some of the nitty gritty then, because you've talked colours and you've talked typography, and then we've talked about things like perception. So I guess what's the first thing somebody should think about when they are thinking about that, the sort of the basic design, what kind of colours shall I use? What perception am I creating? How do I know whether I should have a swirly logo or an angular logo or all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think first thing first, think about who you're appealing to, because often people base it around what they like and what their favourite colours are and things like that. And there is an element. I know there was one of the questions that was put in yesterday was about bringing your personality and things like that into it. Yes, you do that, but it's not just got to be about that. It's got to work with who you're trying to reach. So some of it is looking at that, your ideal client stuff again, which comes up so often, but just working out what's going to resonate with them, what's going to work. Now, on things like colour theory and that side of thing, we could spend an hour talking about that alone, really, I think, if we wanted to. So, but if you go online and Google colour theory or colour charts, those sorts of things, you will find there's a whole load of things on there that have, different examples of colours, and maybe they'll have a few words underneath them of positive or perhaps negative perceptions in some ways to them as well. Generally, that'll sum up what you kind of already know. Really, that's the whole thing. But it gives a little bit of a steer. Don't take it too literally if you go on that as well, because you can get a little bit too nailed down into it. But if you think about it, blues and things like that tend to be a bit safer. That's why you see a lot of yours is breaking away though into the turquoise a lot, isn't it? But the blues tend to be a little bit safer. Loyalty, trust, all those kinds of things it tends to represent, which is why you see banks, accountants, solicitors, and those kind of businesses use it heavily, because actually, that trust and safety aspect of it is important to them. If you look at more creative businesses, my own one, for instance, I've used red a lot. Red can mean danger in some cases, or excitement and things on it. Now, for my type of business, graphic design, actually, you're not so bothered about the danger thing. You wouldn't want red maybe on an accountant's as a general rule or something, because of so there's some very obvious things that come through from there. The tones of those colours within it as well come into it as well. So deeper tones tend to be a little bit more quality and that kind of thing, really. The sort of bright tones you'll see on a lot of kids things, or cheaper end of the market things as well, a lot of the time.
Right. Bright colours talk cheap. That's dangerous, isn't it?
No, not necessarily. There's always going to be exceptions to this of bright colours do work in other cases, but it's just you're trying to come up with general things, very general.
I think it's interesting, though, isn't it, to think about that, what you said about don't just choose your favourite colour, because if somebody is in a business where trust and reliability and accuracy is something really important to their customer, but their favourite colour is orange, then actually you might need to compromise on that a little bit.
Yeah. Or you can, or a lot of the time though, you will use, you don't just use one colour as a general rule as well. So often a bright colour will be paired with some darker ones as well, so that you can use it a little more sparingly maybe, but it works on that.
Okay. When we talk branding and design, what do you think people actually need these days? Davey, you still there? You've gone very still.
I seem to have frozen on video. I don't know if you can still hear me though, can you?
But I can hear you fine actually. But
look, I'm working with my lips moving. Great.
Because I think there's this perception these days, because so much stuff is online now, do I just need a logo and I don't really need anything else? In the good old days, of course, you would have letterheads and you would have comp slips, and I bet some people don't even know what a comp slip is these days. But what, things like, I suppose, social media templates. So what should people be thinking about across the range?
This is where the things that you need evolves, over time, but there's still things. And really, this is actually where it helps to have that solid branding behind it. That actually, if you've got a logo and then you've got your color palette and fonts and whatever else set, then actually you can apply those to whatever you need to apply it to. So yeah, you probably do want the logo in there and to say color palette and things like that, so that you've got those set. The colors probably go beyond just the colors in the logo as well, because otherwise it tends to get a bit boring if you stuck to just 2 or 3 colors or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it may be that then you're applying them to templates for social media graphics. It could be that you still do have, you'll have some kind of thing with, sending invoices out or something. It may be electronic now. It may be through one of the online software and things for doing that. But you're sending things out. It's not uncommon still for companies to have letterheads, but they tend to have them as Word templates rather than as printed ones as a general rule now. There is still a lot of stuff printed as well. So, it really depends on how you're going to be communicating with your customers or whoever else you're trying to reach to, what the means of getting out there is and what's appropriate to your business and the way that you're communicating.
Yeah.
But it's that having that solid foundation behind it will allow you to apply it to whatever you need to apply it, really.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's got to be Eric that said he's just had an order for some compass slips.
Yeah, that'll be Eric.
Fantastic. So just to get a bit controversial, Dave, is there a reason somebody should use a graphic designer to create their logo or their social media templates or stuff like that? Or are some of the handy tools like Canva enough these days?
Look, there's always software around that you can use, whether it is the sort of professional, the standard ones, Adobe Illustrator or something if you're doing a logo in that, or there's Affinity software that does some sort of a bit in between, professional ones but a little less expensive, or there's things like Canva or whatever else. They're all of them are just software, really, so they're only tools to do it. The key thing is, though, the skills of the design, really, and the designer doing it. Now, someone can come up with it themselves, and there are, I've seen examples where people have done their own logo and it works. But your chances of doing something really effective increase the more that you use someone who's trained and learned and, practiced those skills for years. So, yeah, it's all of those things are just tools, really, to do it, and they make it easier. Some of the things like Canva does make it more accessible for people to do it. And it may be that actually you can bootstrap it initially when you get going or something. Just get something quickly in place and get going. But there will probably come a time where even if you've got a design that kind of works, it could just be smartened up a little bit. Or actually, often the issue is that the artwork from a more technical side of things as well can not be quite up to scratch, really, and can cause you problems down the line. So yeah, there are reasons that it'll do it.
I think sometimes one of the things that people find is that because we as business owners don't necessarily have that much knowledge of graphic design, just like we don't have that much knowledge of accounting and all that kind of stuff, that it's easy for us to think, yeah, that'll do, and not necessarily appreciate the difference between a Canva logo and a designed logo until we actually get one and then kind of go, oh, look at that.
Yeah. I mean, on the flip side, I do often advocate that actually sometimes you probably are better just getting something out there rather than investing a huge amount right from the beginning of a business and sort of pouring it into things. Often, that first few months of going proves whether the concept is viable. You may well find that actually the market is in a slightly different place than you anticipated when you were getting going. So sometimes it does make absolute sense to get going on the shoestring, just get out there, get earning money, and then actually, a few months down the line, review it. And at that time, it's probably time to invest it. So it has a place. It has a place, and we all have to prioritize where we spend, especially in the early days of running a business. Yeah. And sometimes just getting out there and actually getting going is more important, I think, isn't it?
Very true. I think often it's very tempting in the early days to feel like you've got to be perfect I've got to have a great logo, I've got to have a fantastic website, I've got to have this and this and this. And then you either never get going because things are not perfect, or you just run out of cash. Whereas, as you say, sometimes it's better to just get going, and yes, do it on a bit of a budget, but then prove the concept, generate a bit of money, and then you can invest a little bit more. You've now frozen with your eyes shut, Dave, so I'm hoping
I seem to have frozen and nodded off now, don't I? Which is not a good look.
Dave's having a little nap. So along that theme, Dave, one of the questions that Victoria asked us was, how would you know when you've outgrown your branding?
I suppose this is one that is individual to different people, but often people come because actually they're not proud of it anymore, and actually they're hiding behind it a little bit, and they're even hesitating to sort of push themselves out there because they're cringing slightly at what they're doing. Now, probably that's an indication that they've waited a little too long. Actually, it's probably been the case for a few months if they're at that stage.
Yeah.
But there is a case where I think people will generally know when that's the case, really, and when they need to step it up. It's easy for me to look at it and go, yeah, that needs improving. It's quite often a difficult thing to tell people that they're at that stage if they've not yet realised it themselves. But it is when you're going in and you don't feel that it's doing you justice anymore, really, I think is the one that probably comes through most typically. As
you say, you'll have that niggle, really, won't you? You'll know. We've got a comment from Andy on LinkedIn. Actually, I think he's perfectly summed it up. He says, "I can use a camera, but I go to a photographer for important family photos. I can use scissors, but I go to a barber. So use a professional, like your clients use you for."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's where sometimes there is a sort of thing where maybe actually it's worth, if it's social media graphics, for instance, getting someone to design the templates that then you can use within Canva or something like that may be an option.
Yeah.
So that actually, yes, you're doing some of it yourself still, but actually you've been given some guidelines to work within. And that probably is a sort of more economical way of doing it for some people, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Use the skills of somebody who actually really knows what they're doing, and then that gives you that sort of outer boundaries almost.
Yeah, that framework, really, isn't it?
Framework, that's the word. That's the perfect word I couldn't find, Dave. Talking frameworks, I know one of the things that you do for your clients is brand guidelines. So tell us a little bit more about what are brand guidelines and what would somebody put in them so that they can do that kind of thing, have that for their own business.
It may be that some of you have come across brand guidelines books when you've been working in larger organisations, and these things can be huge documents that are pages and pages and pages going on, and document pretty much where every dot on every I has got to be and every cross on every T. They don't need to be like that certainly for micro businesses, small businesses. Really, it's a few pages that show what your logos are and the variations on the logo. Document what fonts you should be using. Document the color palette and the color references for that in all the different ways of doing that for different platforms, so CMYK, RGB, and all that stuff. And just record all that things down so that if you've got a few people working on it, and maybe you've got a web designer doing their bit, you've got a graphic designer on it, maybe there's someone producing some pens or something like that, or whatever it may be. You've got a document there that's got all that information on, and people stick to it. So really, it's just pinning down some of that information, really, and so that you're consistent with it, and that's the key thing. It's that consistency, really.
Yeah, fab. So we had a couple of really interesting questions, actually. I think this one was from Helen. And I think this is a question lots of people ask and really flounder on a little bit. We sort of touched on this at the beginning, but we're going to come back to it slightly. How do you put your personality into your branding without it kind of being just totally about you and not actually about the customer at all?
Well, this is where you can get into, of course, personal branding as well as sort of business branding. My focus certainly today is more about the business branding, I suppose. But where with micro businesses with 1-2 people in a business, often the two cross over a hell of a lot anyway, really. And you do want any branding, you want some personality of the business in there. And if where there's crossover and the personality of the business is essentially the personality of the person, then inevitably that's going to come into it. So, if you work in a way that's very energetic or something like that, then actually you probably want to reflect that in that. There's certain characteristics you want to reflect through, because often the business is in the image of the person running it as well, especially with a very small business. So yes, there are things that you bring through into it, but again, remember that you're trying to appeal to your clients as well. So you're wanting some representation of how you are and how the way you work is, but it's not just about representing that in entirety, and you've got to be just keep it in balance, really, I suppose, is the thing.
It's funny because there's a few things that you've said today that have sort of made me think, I probably sort of did many of these things wrong. Because I know when I came to you with the can I have a logo for when I left the franchise and went independent, and I very much came to you with a formed idea of, can I have a logo that looks like a crashing wave, please? So yep. I kind of already had the colour in mind, already had the sort of shape in mind. Definitely is about me and the stuff I like, although I equate it that for me, this is how I explain it anyway, there's a meaning behind my brand in that part of the reason for the whole C is helping clients find more balance, go on more holidays, that kind of stuff. And everybody loves the C, so it must appeal to them, surely.
I think that when you did that, you came along and we tried some ideas along that line. We probably also did some alternatives that were a little away from it as well. And that's fine. Sometimes people come and they've got a very fixed idea of what they want. Sometimes they come and they've got no idea of what they want, and often it's somewhere in between those 2 points. And there's no problem with any of it. It's part. I always believe it's part of my job to actually then get that information out to people if they haven't got any idea. Listen to what they're saying and then formulate the idea that does it. And sometimes, if they do have a very fixed idea, the part of the job is also to take that on board, maybe produce an option that shows that, but then maybe suggest away from it and suggest a few other options that might work better for them. In your case, you came and you wanted that idea, and yes, that worked, and that's what we went through with and everything, and it's fine. That often is the case. People know their own business as well, so you can't ignore that. It's not my job to sort of. I think it's actually very poor design, actually, if you go, oh no, this is what you need completely, and ignore what the client has said in entirety. You've got to work with them. But sometimes you have to advise that actually other routes might be the better ones. So it's that just balance of getting it.
From the perspective of a customer, because I guess there's also sometimes there's questions about why should I use a designer? What would I get from a designer? How do I find the right designer? So just thinking from that, we are sort of gravitating quite a bit towards logo today, but that's kind of natural. So if somebody's contemplating working with a designer, do they need to start that conversation with quite a fixed view about what they want? Or is it a key part of the designer's role to actually help them to draw that out?
Yeah, it's a key part of the designer's role. They may have a fixed idea, but they may have a complete blank canvas on it. And as I say, either of those is absolutely fine. People come, with that situation, or either of those situations really frequently, and neither is a problem. What they have got to be willing to do is have a conversation. And if the client is willing to be open in that conversation and to be open and honest in it and go through all the details, then it actually gives you a chance of actually designing something that'll work. And it is that you almost need to be working in partnership, really, and not as a sort of client-supplier relationship. Absolutely. You're working almost more of a partnership in it. And that's when it works. So it's having that conversation. But your designer, any good designer, should be asking questions and asking lots of those questions and listening, and asking and things. And some won't be really related. It's just related to the design itself. It's getting an understanding of the business, how you're working, who you're trying to reach, all that kind of thing, just so that you can get your head inside both the client situation, but also actually more often it's getting your head inside their clients' minds as well, and understanding them. And really, that's far more important than anything that you'll do on the computer. If you'd not got that understanding in the first place, then yes, you can go on the computer and produce something pretty, but it won't have all that stuff behind it that is where the real success is going to be.
Yeah. How advisable is it for somebody, let's say somebody's had 2 or 3 potential logos designed and they can't make their mind up between them? How advisable is it for them to ask social media for their opinion?
I guessed where you were going on this one fairly early on in that question. Personally, I think that your best way of doing it is to have 2 or 3 people who know your business well, and use them as a sounding board. Get their opinions, but be prepared to ignore their opinions as well sometimes. I think that sometimes when you put it out, you see people put out on social media is 20 designs that I've had put forward, and often not even at a late stage of the process, it's fairly early on. And I just feel for the designer in that situation, because it is a hide into nothing really. That things will be pulled apart, but none of those people have been in on the brief. They don't really understand the business. All they're looking at is a visual in isolation. It's not got any context around it, and there's no indication of what the thought process is that's got it to that point as well. So,
because I see a lot of this happen online, and I always cringe when I see it. But the main reason I cringe is because people typically get a load of opinion from people who are not their target client. So they may very well be dragged towards a specific design, but is not the one that actually appeals to their
I think
target.
You'll end up with the sort of middle of the road one by doing that process as well. So you'll discard anything that's slightly different as well, and go for either the middle of the road or the safe option. It will sometimes lead to, but also, it can confuse more than anything as well. I think you can come away from it more confused than ever, and that's why I think using that small sounding board of people is a much more reliable way of doing it, really, as well. I think sometimes there is a thing as well that actually, when they're shared on social media, often when it's just one or the final couple of options, it's actually someone spinning it for a bit of publicity, really, rather than to get opinion.
That is true.
But even so.
Good bit of PR. Oh, look at my potential new logos. A bit of engagement bait. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I think that pretty much covers all my questions. Unless Eric says, "Would you ask Joe down the pub about your tax?" I thought it was always Dave down the pub you asked about your tax, funnily enough. So I think that covers all of our key questions today. I've seen the one comment on LinkedIn. I'm hoping there's not more I've missed, because sometimes the comments on LinkedIn are a bit hidden. But if anybody has any questions for Dave, I'm more than happy to ask him about his favourite font, all that kind of stuff. But Dave, if anybody else is watching today and is feeling inspired in the sense of, or maybe inspired or motivated to have a conversation about their own design stuff and whether it's doing what it needs to, or where they can get a bit more help or support, how can they get hold of you?
And I'm always happy to just have a chat. It's not necessarily leading to anything. Sometimes it's just that 5 minutes of advice or a little bit of sounding board can help too. But you can generally find me on LinkedIn. I'll quite often be found on. I think it's just under my name on that one. It's Facebook page I usually post on as well, which is Opus Creative Design. Website is opuscreative.co.uk. There, no design in that. Although actually that would get you there anyway, I think. And very occasionally on Instagram, but not very often. That's one of the things Paula keeps telling me I need to do.
I'm still trying to. I think you're still trying to coax your teenage daughter to become your Instagram marketing manager, aren't you? That's probably
I think actually, as it's school holiday, I think it's probably her fault that the internet keeps freezing. She's probably running all kinds of devices.
She's probably got 8,000 things going on in the background.
Probably,
Oh, that's fab. Thank you so much, Dave, for being my guest today. Thank you for everybody who tuned in, and certainly Eric for chipping in along the way there. Dave, if you could pop all of your links into the comments.
I will do.
If you could pop that into the Facebook group and stick that into LinkedIn as well, and then people will happily come over and connect with you. But that pretty much wraps us up for today. So thank you very much for being my guest. Thank you, everybody else, for watching. I'm just rambling because LinkedIn tends to take about 20 seconds to catch up. And if I don't ramble, it just chops me off halfway through the end. So I just tend to waffle slightly until I think it's actually caught up. But we should be there about now. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. If anybody watches this later on, give us a little hashtag replay to let us know you've watched. And if you watched later and you've still got questions for Dave, please feel free to keep popping those in. And I'm quite sure that Dave will happily keep his eye on things and
Absolutely,
come back and answer any additional questions you have. So thank you, everybody, and see you all very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.